I didn't know yet that a year later, I'd be stepping onto a stage in a skirt under a different name. But that night in the basement, when my voice sounded too soft for a boy, fate had already made its move. The basement smelled like dust, sweat, and failure. Guitars sat heavy on our knees, fingers stumbling through chords that refused to live longer than a few seconds. Everything sounded wrong. Too safe, too stolen, too dead. We were about to quit when something snapped inside me. I dropped my pick, flipped open my notebook like it was evidence of a crime, and pulled out the one song I'd been hiding, the one I wasn't supposed to share. I passed the pages around, bracing for the usual polite lies. Instead, we played one run-through and froze. No one spoke, no one laughed. We just stared at each other, hearts pounding, all thinking the same impossible thought. This song changes everything. It didn't explode into the room. It slipped in quietly and owned the place. Soft, intimate, almost dangerous in its restraint. Not jazz, not swing, too raw for rock. A country ache underneath it, bare and honest, like a confession you didn't mean to make. Tom finally broke the spell and laughed. "Sing it, Sam." I stepped up to the microphone we barely knew how to use, and the moment my voice filled the room, my old life quietly started to fall apart. I never thought of myself as a singer. I usually stayed behind the chords, safe and quiet. But this time, I opened my mouth without thinking, and the sound that came out startled me. It carried. It blended. It fit the music so cleanly that even I had to listen twice. The room filled up with it. Somewhere overhead, Betty must have heard, because she came down the stairs and leaned against the wall, smiling while we ran the song again and again, tightening it, smoothing the rough edges, tuning small things until they disappeared. On the last take, everything lined up. My voice bounced off the concrete walls and came back fuller, almost like we were playing in a real hall instead of a cluttered basement. When the final note faded, Betty started clapping. She had never done that before, not once. "That was wonderful," she said, still smiling. "I am impressed. You should make a tape of that." After she went back upstairs, we just stood there grinning at one another, buzzing. Using the studio at school, we recorded the song properly and mailed it off to a recording company with zero expectations and a lot of hope. Then we waited. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. I opened it and felt the words jump off the page. I could barely breathe as I reread it. Betty took it from my hands and read it herself. I watched her eyes widen, then soften. Then she laughed out loud. "Betty," I said, stunned. "They think Jessica and I are girls." "I see that, dear. Well, when you sing, you do sound like girls. But you sing in perfect pitch, and the music is beautiful. Betty, they are offering a lot of money." That much was true. The letter spelled it out clearly. They would pay us well if we came to their offices and sang live for them. If we made the grade, there was a contract waiting. Betty leaned back and gave me a look that made my stomach tighten. "You might look very nice as a girl, dear. I would help you if you wanted to try." "No chance, Betty. The guys will understand." She cut in gently. "They want this contract too, don't they?" "Yes. But then they will understand. Call them. Ask them to bring their mothers." I did what she said, my hands shaking with excitement and fear tangled together. The opportunity felt enormous, impossible to ignore. Sometime later, without telling me, Betty played the tape for Robert. He listened closely, smiling, nodding along. When it ended, he asked who the girls were singing. "You know them both," Betty said calmly. "They are not girls. That is Sam and Jessica." Robert stared at her. "The company thought they were girls too, didn't they?" She nodded. "Do the boys know?" "Sam does. I asked him to bring everyone here so we can talk." When we were all gathered in the family room, Betty laid it out, even replayed the tape so the other mothers could hear for themselves. The guys were shocked by the offer, then visibly rattled by what it implied. Dressing like girls was not part of the original dream. Still, the pull of the contract dulled their objections. We argued, explained, circled the same points, until Robert finally went to his office to make the call. 10 minutes later, he came back. He laughed when I told him the truth, Robert said. But he also said if the boys sound that good in person, the offer stands. That means publicity, photos, album covers, maybe videos. He paused, letting it sink in. The unspoken part was obvious. 4 boys, 2 of whom sounded unmistakably female, would be harder to sell. I suggest we take our son and see if we can make him look presentable as a girl. You should do the same with Jessica. Meet back here in 2 days. The mothers agreed again, and just like that, the air shifted. I knew something irreversible was starting. I also realized that as a girl on stage, I would not have crowds of girls throwing underwear at me. Not like the others imagined. That fantasy was officially off the table. I looked at my friends. Doubt sat heavy on their faces. After they left, Betty took me into her bedroom and told me to strip down to my briefs. I was 16. Jessica was 15. Mike was 15. Bill 16. Jessica and I were the smallest of the group. I stood 5'7" and maybe weighed 130. Jessica was built like me, only thinner. Mike was shorter and heavier. Bill was bigger, broader, solid. I knew boys could look stunning as girls. I had seen it on television. But now it was not an idea. It was me. And as I stood there, waiting for Betty to assess what she was working with, I was sure I was about to look ridiculous. She gave me a cream and carefully removed all body hair below the neck, then told me to shower and shave my face closely. When I came out, my skin was smooth, my face almost baby soft, and my long hair fell across my shoulders. "These are new panties, Amelia. Put them on and take care of that." She meant my male anatomy, and I complied, tucking everything away to present a smoother front. "Come sit here at the vanity." Betty began setting my hair in rollers. "Now you learn how to do makeup, Amelia." "Do we have to do this, Betty?" "I mean, it's so—" Robert called and told them you were all boys, honey, and you know what their response was. "The sound is perfect, but the image must match." I looked at her, seeing only determination, and gave in. I applied the foundation, powder, eye makeup, and blusher myself under her direction. "I'll just thin your eyebrows a bit, Amelia. Hold still." Using tweezers, she shaped my brows, then told me to stand. "This is a bra, and this is how you wear it." She slipped it on and added soft, flesh-colored breast forms that filled out the cups and gave me an A-cup shape. "This is a padded panty brief. It will give you shape." I pulled it on, then sat to pull on pantyhose, the nylon feeling electric against my now smooth legs. They feel good, don't they? It's different, that's for sure. I didn't want to admit I liked the feeling. "These skirts are all yours. Try this electric blue one first." I stepped into the pleated skirt, noticing it fell mid-thigh, then pulled on the simple silver top she offered. Back at the vanity, she removed the cap and rollers, brushing my hair into a fluffy, feminine style with curls at the side and back. The girl staring back was almost unrecognizable. "Use this, Amelia." She handed me the pale red lipstick. My fingers trembled as I traced the shape she had shown me, careful, slow. When I finished and looked up, the change felt complete in a way I had not expected. The girl in the mirror had a softness to her mouth now, a hint of confidence that made my chest tighten. Betty clipped blue earrings onto my ears, fastened a thin bracelet at my ankle, then slid a simple watch onto my wrist. My feet eased into the silver heels without a struggle. Betty took my hand and guided me to stand beside her in front of the mirror. I could not look away. The girl staring back had a gentle face framed by soft brown hair. Her eyes looked brighter, carefully lined and shaded. The outfit pulled everything together, shaping a narrow waist and clean lines. It shocked me how little it had taken. More than that, it shocked me that the girl was me. "Shall we show your father?" Betty asked lightly. I lingered for a second longer before she tugged my arm. The sound of my heels on the hardwood announced us before I was ready. I stood frozen in the doorway, heart racing, suddenly aware of everything I had to lose. Robert rose slowly, staring, surprise written across his face. He said nothing at first. I told you she would be lovely, Robert. Just look at her. Robert stepped closer, his eyes moving from my hair to my shoes. Careful, almost analytical. I never expected. He stopped, then nodded. She looks great. Looking this put together, they will have no trouble offering the contract. I stood there, suspended between them, no longer sure where Sam ended and someone else began. We need a name, Robert said finally. We cannot call her Sam. The word name landed harder than I expected. Betty considered for only a moment. How about Amelia? Same starting letter. Anne for a middle name. It keeps your initials. Amelia Ann. I tried it quietly in my mind, then nodded. Betty turned back to Robert. We will need to do some shopping tomorrow. This is only the beginning. Within minutes, she returned, holding a purse and placed it into my hands. No time like the present, Amelia. Let us get you a few more skirts and tops. Maybe another bra? We will be back in time for dinner. She took my arm before I could argue, and just like that, I was outside as a girl. The open air made my stomach jump. Every passing car felt like a spotlight. Betty guided me straight to the car, all confidence, and we drove to the mall. I do not understand why you are so nervous, she said cheerfully. You look wonderful. Blue truly suits you. She did not notice the way eyes followed as we walked. To me, the color felt loud, unavoidable. At the department store, we moved quickly, selecting sensible shoes, practical basics, dresses that could pass without calling attention. I chose carefully, grateful when we finally headed home. Back inside, Betty instructed me to change for dinner. I stood alone in my room, staring at myself again, wondering how a day could stretch so far. The thought of the money crept in, unwanted but persuasive. When I struggled with the zipper, Betty showed me patiently, guiding my hands until it worked. The dress fit cleanly, shorter than I was used to, but balanced. She adjusted my hair again, swapped my earrings, added a belt, then sent me to wait. Robert said nothing when he saw me, but he did not look away either. At the restaurant, no one stopped us. No one stared the way I feared. Dinner passed with quiet corrections and gentle guidance from Betty, and by the end of it, she said I had done well. That night, before turning out the light, she told me to wake early. The others would be arriving by 10. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, knowing that the next morning would change more than just how I looked. By 9 the next morning, I was dressed again, fully and carefully. The blue skirt hung just right, the silver blouse smooth against my shoulders. My makeup was finished, my hair set, and the light scent of perfume followed me as I waited in the family room, hands folded, nerves buzzing under everything. When Bill arrived with his mother, both of them stopped short. Their expressions made my stomach twist. I had no way of knowing what they really saw when they looked at me. The doorbell rang again. Betty did not move. "Amelia, get the door." She said it gently, but there was no mistaking the expectation behind it. I crossed the room and opened the door and froze. Jessica stood there, but not in any way I recognized. The transformation hit me like a jolt. She looked incredible. I stepped back to let her in, too stunned to speak. Finally, she grinned and broke the tension herself. "Like it?" "Call me Jessica." She wore a white sundress with thin straps, shaped neatly at the waist and flowing easily at the hips. Everything about her looked natural, practiced. Her sandals showed off neat red nails. Her makeup was flawless. There was nothing hesitant in the way she moved, nothing uncertain. She caught my reaction immediately and smiled wider. "I can help you if you want." I mean, really help. That was when it clicked. Jessica had done this before. She was comfortable, confident, even pleased. Betty appeared, took one look at her, and then looked to me for confirmation. When I told her who it was, she nodded slowly, thoughtful. Mike arrived next with his mother. The adults watched us closely while Mike and Bill stood there openly staring, shock slowly turning into amused disbelief. They were smiling, even if they tried to hide it. The parents began talking among themselves in quiet clusters. We started to sit down, but Betty stopped us. "Stay where you are." Robert came in carrying his camera and tripod. Without ceremony, he set it up and started taking pictures. Together, apart, different angles. I followed instructions almost automatically. One pose in particular made my stomach drop. Knee on a chair, weight shifted, head tilted slightly. Betty approved it instantly. "That one works very well." I nodded, feeling exposed, uncertain. When Mike's mother spoke, something inside me sank. I think this might work. If it worked, it meant we were past the point of backing out. She continued calmly, explaining logistics like it was already decided. Changing schools, starting fresh. Amelia and Jessica attending as girls to avoid confusion. Consistency, stability. The words landed one by one, heavy each time they hit. I looked at Mike, at Bill, at Jessica. Their faces mirrored what I felt: shock, fear, expectation. Except Jessica was smiling. "Betty," I said quietly, "you want me to go to school as a girl?" "Yes. That is exactly what we mean." She did not hedge or soften it. She spoke as if it were obvious. There was a month left of school. Our recording session was scheduled a week later. She had already planned the timeline. The day school ended would be the last day I ever went anywhere dressed as a boy. Jessica looked delighted. Betty clapped her hands together lightly. "Let us hear the music again. I want to see you perform the way you will later." We went to the basement, my heels marking each step. In 20 minutes we were set. The mothers watched as Jessica and I sang together. Then I took my solo, and finally all of us joined in. I moved carefully, aware of the clothes, of how I had to carry myself now. I focused on the music, on the sound. When we finished, there was a pause. Then applause filled the room. They left an hour later. I assumed I could finally change. Betty shook her head. "It is only mid-afternoon. Let us get your colors done and pick out your makeup. You will need to learn sooner or later. Do I have a choice?" "Not really, dear. You know how well this works. If you sign that contract, you will live this way. Girls your age know how to manage their appearance. You will too." I sat in silence, turning it all over inside my head. Yesterday, I had been a boy with a song. Today, I was being asked to step fully into a new life. Betty waited patiently, letting me arrive at the conclusion myself. "If they accept us," I said quietly, "then that means I can never really dress as a boy again, does it?" Betty did not hesitate. "I do not see how you could. You would be under scrutiny constantly. Think about the attention. Think what the tabloids would do with even a hint of inconsistency." I lowered myself onto the chair at the vanity, the inevitability settling in. I had imagined fame for as long as I could remember, but never like this. Never as someone else. Betty watched me wrestle with it, then glanced at Jessica, clearly sensing she had something to say. With a short sigh, Betty decided our shopping could wait and sent us to my room. The moment I closed the door behind us, Jessica's tone shifted. This was no longer excitement. It was focus. She changed quickly into her comfortable day clothes and then sat across from me. "Amelia, there's something you need to know. I have been figuring this stuff out for a long time. Since I was a kid, actually. And that means I already solved one of the biggest problems you are worried about." She explained carefully, describing specialized garments, custom shaping, professional-grade accessories designed for performance and consistency. Nothing theatrical, nothing exaggerated. Just realism. It felt unreal hearing her talk about it so calmly, as if this were just another tool. Jessica wasn't guessing. She knew. "I can help you look natural," she said. "Not dressed up, just believable." Before I could respond, Betty appeared in the doorway, clearly sensing something serious was happening. Jessica explained again, this time directly to her, describing how performers solved the problem we were facing and why it mattered. Betty listened very carefully. Then she said, "Show me." We went to my computer, and Jessica pulled up a manufacturer's site. Product details, photos, instructions, reviews. Everything was clinical, professional, unmistakably real. Well, Betty said finally, I will be damned. Jessica printed the information and gathered her things. This solves more than one issue, Betty said thoughtfully. I will call the other mothers. They should understand what they are going to see. When Jessica left, I sat alone for a long time, imagining myself without layers or disguises, trying to reconcile that image with the girl everyone expected to see. Monday came and went with painful slowness. School felt different now, temporary. Even clothes felt temporary. After a few days, I noticed details I never had before. How fabrics felt, how moves changed. Jessica still dressed as a boy at school, but I noticed subtle things, the way her posture had shifted, the way her clothes fell. No one else seemed to notice. The week dragged on. Every walk home was filled with speculation, jokes, nervousness. Slowly, resistance faded into resignation. By the time I walked through my front door on Friday, Betty was waiting, smiling. She gestured me toward my room. On the bed were several closed boxes. I did not need to ask. Get changed, Amelia. Today is the day. I hesitated. Fully? She nodded, calm, unshaken. I followed instructions carefully, focusing on each step exactly as explained. There was no rush, no embarrassment in her voice, no judgment, just guidance, just preparation. This was no longer about pretending. It was about commitment. In less than an hour, it was done. The instructions had been clear, methodical, almost clinical, and when Betty stepped back and nodded, I understood why she had been so calm. The result was undeniable. My shape had changed, not exaggerated, not artificial, just different. The paperwork had said the adhesive could last a month or more. That single detail made my stomach flip. This was not a rehearsal anymore. This was commitment. Without ceremony, Betty told me to get dressed and left the room. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. My hips were softer and rounder now, my waist more defined. My chest had a gentle curve that caught the light naturally. My hair fell loose around my shoulders, framing my face in a way that felt intentional instead of accidental. For the first time since this all began, something unexpected slipped in alongside the fear. Curiosity, maybe even a hint of excitement. I turned to my dresser. The top drawer now held neatly folded underthings, organized without comment. Another drawer held bras. In the closet were dresses and skirts that hadn't existed a week ago. This was no longer borrowed territory. It was mine. I chose carefully. Makeup was first, steady hands now, fewer corrections. Then clothing. I paused when I saw the sundress. Light blue, simple straps, familiar for a reason. I smiled despite myself and took it out. Getting dressed felt strangely routine. Hose, then the dress, zipped smoothly. Flats instead of heels this time. Hair pulled back into a clean ponytail, soft bangs brushed forward. Earrings, watch, perfume used sparingly. I checked myself once more, then took a breath. At the top of the stairs, I noticed what caught my eye. First was balance. Nothing felt out of place. I told Betty I was heading out and received only a nod in return. Driving felt normal. Walking up to Jessica's house did not. I paused briefly when I realized her sister and friends were there, then reminded myself there was no good alternative. I allowed myself one steadying breath and went inside. The reaction was nothing. A greeting. A name spoken naturally. No second glance. It was oddly reassuring. Jessica was on the patio with Bill when I joined them, dressed casually, relaxed. Mike arrived shortly after. For a moment, we all just looked at each other, then laughed. Tension broke quickly. What had seemed impossible days earlier was now simply the situation. We talked about music, logistics, how performing would feel now that the dynamic had shifted. It felt professional, forward-looking. When Mike commented on how convincing Jessica and I looked, there was no embarrassment left, only acknowledgement. If this was what we were doing, we would do it properly. Eventually, we drifted apart and headed home. When I walked through the door, Robert looked up, startled, then quietly took in the details. He said nothing, but his expression told me everything. This was real to him now, too. I moved past him, purse slipping from my hand, then bent to retrieve it before heading upstairs, keenly aware that how I moved mattered now. Every action carried meaning I had never considered before. Later, alone in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let it all settle. The fear hadn't vanished, but something else had taken shape alongside it. Resolve. "Betty," Robert said sharply. "Yes, dear? Are you aware that Amelia has— that she actually fills out her— bra?" Betty didn't even look up. "Yes. She has breasts. Did you know that?" "Of course I did. I attached them this morning." "Why?" He threw his hands up like surrendering to gravity and retreated to the living room, muttering something about watching the news. Betty turned back to me with a measured expression. "He's adjusting, Amelia. It will take time. And stop bending at the waist. Bend at the knees instead. Men are visual creatures. Even when he's your father, he's still wired that way, and you don't need to make it harder for him." The next day, we drove out for the demo session and stayed at the same hotel. Jessica and I wore the matching skirts Betty had picked out, but Jessica had upgraded the look with new tops she'd found on her own. They were bolder, lower cut, and she wore them like she'd earned the right. Robert hauled the equipment in his truck while we followed in 2 cars. At the studio, the crew unloaded our gear efficiently, setting us up fast. Our parents sat with the director, the same man Robert had told we were all boys. I caught the look on his face when he glanced at Jessica and me. "You said these were boys?" he asked. Robert cleared his throat. "Yes." The man tilted his head slightly. "2 of them don't resemble any boys I know." "You told us to do our best," Robert said calmly. That ended the discussion. We were given the cue. We played our songs, each one twice. Then the director returned with a few sheets of unfamiliar music. "I like your sound," he said. "You've got an edge I didn't expect. Try this." When I saw the title, I nearly laughed. "Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy." "I know," he said. "Old. Humor me." He left us alone. We studied the arrangement quickly. Jessica and I split the lead. Mike dropped under us. Bill anchored the bottom. Bill tapped out the rhythm. I picked it up on the piano, and we ran it once, then again. It clicked instantly. By the time we sang it, the room felt charged. We were tighter, sharper than the original, and when we tried it without the sheet music, it came alive even more. When the director returned, he didn't stop us. He let the song finish. The contracts were signed that same afternoon. Afterward, Jessica and I were asked to stay behind with the director and our parents. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "These girls have exactly what we're looking for. Swing is hot again, but you bring something modern to it. That's the angle we'll use." Robert nodded cautiously. "There is one concern we should discuss early," he continued. "Traditionally, male voices change. That would destroy this sound. However, given where things are now, that may not be an issue." The silence stretched. "If it does become one," he added, "there are solutions. Medical ones. That would require agreement when the time came." Robert went pale. Betty stiffened. I was lost. Jessica, however, looked delighted. "I'm in," she said immediately. "That means Amelia can't—" "That's correct, sir. Amelia can't." Betty touched my arm gently. "He's talking about a medical procedure to keep your voice unchanged. No one is insisting on anything, but it's something to think about." The director nodded. From our standpoint, it would also be easier if Jessica and Amelia had a more naturally feminine appearance. We would, of course, cover all expenses deemed appropriate by medical professionals. That's when I understood. Jessica already had. She was practically glowing. For her, this wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. For me, it felt like the floor dropped away. No, I said immediately. No way. The director raised his hand. May we give the girls a moment alone with their families? He left. The room closed in around me. Betty spoke first, her voice careful but firm. If this career takes off the way he believes it will, you'll be living as a girl full-time anyway, Amelia. That won't change. Robert stayed silent. Jessica's mother stepped forward. As a nurse, I should explain what he's referring to. Nothing immediate. Enhancements to align appearance with presentation. Possibly permanent hair removal. Shaping procedures. Nothing unheard of in performance industries. Jessica nodded along, utterly unfazed. She's ready, Betty said softly. She's known who she is for years. Everyone looked at me. Mrs. Wilson didn't soften the question. This would be about long-term comfort, Amelia. And consistency. The question is whether you can accept that. I swallowed. When he said any course of action the doctors deem necessary, what exactly does that mean? At minimum, Betty said gently, physical enhancements to match what you already present. Nothing else? I asked, my voice tight. The room waited. You are not even old enough yet, Betty said calmly, and no one would consider anything until you have been in an approved program for at least 2 years. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I feared losing something, but because I understood what she was really saying. It was not about taking away what made me male so much as committing fully to what made me female. That thought settled deep, uncomfortable, but strangely logical. As much as I resisted admitting it, I had begun to like my new shape. I liked how clothes fit, how I moved, how natural it all felt once I stopped fighting it. Having my own breasts would remove the last layer of pretending. Combined with everything else, it would make fitting in simpler, cleaner, more honest. I wondered what Robert would say when I agreed. All right, I will do it. But the breast enhancements have to be included. I braced myself for shouting, for arguments, for panic. Instead, there was only a long, quiet sigh. The director was brought back into the room. Robert spoke before anyone else could hesitate. We will agree, provided the contract is for 10 years. That part had not been discussed beforehand, but Robert saw the leverage and used it. A decade meant stability, protection, and time to make the sacrifice worthwhile. The director hesitated, visibly uneasy, but in the end, he agreed. The ride home was quiet. No one celebrated. No one backed out. That night, Betty and I sat together in my room while everything finally caught up with me. They are planning around you already, Amelia, she said. Advertising, touring, footage, image. All of it assumes one thing. You will be living as a girl full-time anyway. Doing this only makes it easier in the long run. I did not respond right away. She left me alone with the thought. By morning, I knew my answer. My room no longer looked like a boy's room. Nothing here was borrowed or temporary anymore. More importantly, I was not merely tolerating the clothes or the body. I was settling into them. Something had shifted quietly, solidly. I told Betty I was ready. Then I called the others. When we met at Mike's house, Jessica and I arrived dressed as ourselves. I told them everything. The length of the contract, the permanence, the reasons. I am in, Jessica said without missing a beat. Mike hesitated longer, but eventually nodded. Bill did not hesitate at all. Someone has to keep you two out of trouble, he said. 2 days later, Betty drove me to the clinic. The doctor was tall, silver-haired, serious but kind. He explained everything carefully, not rushing, not sugarcoating. Possibilities, limits, risks, nothing hidden. When he finished, he examined me, professionally and without commentary. The sooner we begin, the easier it will be, he said simply. Within the hour, I was prepared. When I woke, groggy and sore, the difference was unmistakable. The contour of my chest was real now. No padding, no adhesive, no illusion. I reached instinctively downward, reassured myself of what remained unchanged. then exhaled. Recovery took days, not weeks. When the bandages were removed, the results were clean, precise, undeniably mine. My existing wardrobe still fit. Somehow that mattered more than I expected. Within a week, Jessica and I both looked and felt settled in our bodies. No guessing, no pretending. Work began immediately after that. Recording sessions in the mornings, wardrobe fittings in the afternoons, old songs reimagined, new ones introduced. The director pushed us hard, but knew exactly what he wanted. Betty helped coordinate everything: colors, image, cohesion. My stage wardrobe leaned heavily toward blue, and I accepted that without hesitation. This was not a costume anymore. It was my life. The image they built around us was unmistakable. Tight lines, short hems, confident silhouettes. Jessica and I were styled to be striking without crossing into parody. Haircuts reshaped our faces. Nails were lengthened and kept immaculate. Makeup stopped being something we applied and became something we wore. Training sessions filled the gaps we didn't even know existed. Our first album was released without a single live appearance. The label wanted control. The cover showed us angled just right, polished and alluring without being overt. Everything about it said intentional. When I finally saw it in a store window, I barely recognized the girl in blue as myself. One afternoon, Jessica and I were out shopping when we spotted Bill across the street with one of our classmates. Lisa was tall, graceful, effortlessly attractive, and she laughed at everything he said. Bill leaned in close, clearly comfortable with the attention. "Looks like Bill adjusted pretty fast," I said. Jessica smiled knowingly. "Our turn will come. Just give it time." I wasn't jealous, not really. I simply hadn't learned yet to think about boys the way girls did. I enjoyed being visible now, confident in my clothes, moving through the world without hesitation. But dating hadn't entered the picture for me yet. I told myself I wasn't ready. When the album dropped, everything accelerated. Fan mail poured in. Most of it wasn't about music. It was obvious what they saw when they wrote to us. And it wasn't subtle. I didn't answer those letters. I just stacked them away. Our first live show sold out in 2 days. That fact alone unsettled me. Robert insisted on coming along for the early gigs. He said it was for security, but I knew better. He was worried we would lose ourselves. Or worse, find something we weren't supposed to. On stage, Jessica and I changed outfits twice. We opened in skirts and tops with silver shoes, then returned in gowns that were precisely cut, short and daring. Even Betty raised an eyebrow at those. Fans started calling me Blue. Jessica became Red. The letters followed suit. After 3 shows, Robert stopped coming. It was shortly after that when we discovered Jessica wasn't nearly as innocent as I'd assumed. Mike found her one night in her room, sheets tangled, a stagehand slipping out quietly. We said nothing. It was her life. But the knowledge stayed with me. The theory became real. Then we had a week off. I welcomed the pause. At home, my wardrobe had grown again. More options every time I opened the closet. After 2 months, my movements had softened. My reactions followed suit. I no longer worried about being exposed. Who I was had crystallized. Robert still struggled. Sometimes he would look away if I crossed the hall too quickly or laughed without thinking. He was adjusting slower than everyone else. Betty pushed gently but firmly. Around the house, she wanted skirts, not jeans. Dresses, not shorts. One afternoon, I complied without arguing, slipping into a short skirt and fitted top before heading out. I drove to Jessica's place, found her gone, and turned back. That's when Bill approached the car. "Hi, Amelia." He smiled in a way that felt different. "Lunch?" he asked. "I know this great spot." It startled me more than it should have. He knew everything about me. He always had. Still, I agreed. He drove. The park was quiet, familiar. When I stepped out of the car, he took my hand naturally, spun me lightly, and kissed me. There was no hesitation in him, and none in me. It lingered, long enough to reset something in my chest. When he pulled away and led me forward, my legs felt unsteady, not from fear, but from clarity. We ate, talked, wandered by the lake. When his arm settled around me, I didn't pull away. "Jessica and Mike are together now," he said softly. "I thought maybe we could be too." I answered without words. Those hours shifted everything. Up until then, I had treated my transformation as practical necessity. Career insurance. A path laid out, not chosen. But suddenly, the truth pressed closer. The letters I received weren't written to a persona. They were written to a girl. To me. Every time I undressed, the reflection confirmed it. My body wasn't borrowed anymore. It was mine. The habit stuck. The gestures didn't drop away when I was relaxed. Makeup, bras, posture. It was all instinct now. Betty noticed. She didn't say much, but sometimes she smiled. I hadn't realized how far I'd come until Bill put words to it with a single kiss. I was no longer playing a role to protect a future. He saw me as female now and responded to me the way men do when they are drawn to a girl they like. The fact that he knew my history didn't seem to matter. What mattered was who I was now. That question followed me everywhere. Was I still a boy wearing a girl's life, or had the balance remembered itself and tipped too far to return? We were packing for 3 out-of-town dates, where we would debut new material when Betty came into my room, quietly closed the door, and sat beside me on the bed. She waited until I noticed her. "What's troubling you, honey?" I kept folding clothes, knowing there was no point dodging the truth. "Bill." Her nod was immediate, knowing. "He's attracted to you." I nodded. "And you're thinking about letting it become more than friendship." Another nod. She watched me for a long moment, then spoke gently but firmly. "Good girls think before they act, Amelia. You know that. But Jessica and Mike, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about you." She leaned back, thoughtful, then smiled in that familiar, knowing way. "I'm not blind, Amelia. Nor am I foolish. I know how young people are, and your father and I were no different once upon a time. I just want you to be careful." I hugged her then, holding on longer than usual, because in that moment I understood something quietly and completely. I wasn't choosing this anymore. I was already living it. There was no going back. For the trip, I wore a sundress. Mike drove, Jessica beside him, Bill and I in the back seat, one of our mothers along as always. The company now shipped our equipment ahead of us, so traveling felt lighter, freer. Bill's hand rested against my leg, absent-minded at first, then lingering. I was grateful we weren't alone, because my reactions were no longer hypothetical. When we returned, we had a long break. Betty helped me remake my room completely. Softer colors. A real vanity. A bed I chose myself. My wardrobe grew again, and with it, my confidence. I tried new styles, learned what flattered me, what made me feel strong. Some outfits surprised even me. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in something especially daring and froze, startled by my own boldness. Betty walked in, took one look, and raised an eyebrow. "That's effective," she said calmly. "Where exactly were you planning to wear that?" I smiled and said nothing. She didn't press. She didn't need to. Later, I changed into a simple dress, grabbed my purse, and went to find Bill. He drove us quietly, the tension between us dense but unspoken. When we stopped at the hotel, neither of us asked why. We rode the elevator without touching. In the room, he hesitated, watching me like he was afraid I'd disappear if he blinked. I crossed the space between us. After that, time became less important than sensation and closeness, and the overwhelming certainty of choice. Nothing felt forced or stolen. Nothing felt wrong. When we finally rested, I lay there, breath slowing, understanding something essential. What I had feared wasn't losing myself. He lay beside me as the room slowly returned to stillness. There was no rush to move, no awkward silence to fill. I rested against him, his arm around me, my head rising and falling with his breath. What I felt then was not guilt, not triumph, but an unexpected calm. Something inside me had aligned. For the first time, my thoughts, my body, and my sense of self were not arguing with one another. I understood, with startling clarity, that this was not a moment I would later try to undo or explain away. I had crossed a line willingly, and it hadn't felt like a loss. It felt like confirmation. When Bill finally drove me back to my car, we didn't speak much. We didn't need to. I went home quiet and centered, the world somehow sharper and softer at the same time. Betty was waiting. Mothers do seem to have a sense for these things. She looked at me once, really looked, then simply shook her head and gestured toward the patio. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Amelia Ann, you did not just go out for a drive." I said nothing. There was no denial in me anymore. She watched me for a moment longer, then sat beside me. "I'm not angry," she said gently. "I'm concerned. But I also see how settled you are. That matters more than rules ever will." I stared out into the yard, gathering the courage that had already become familiar to me. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary," she continued. "Maybe it's time you stop pretending too." We talked long into the evening. Not in absolutes, not in ultimatums, just in truths finally spoken aloud. By the time I went to bed, the decision was no longer frightening. It was inevitable. I entered the program under a new name, quietly, carefully. The world didn't need to know everything all at once. On stage, I was already Amelia. Off stage, I was learning how to be her without hesitation. Jessica had already taken those steps before me, and together we leaned on each other when the weight of secrecy pressed too hard. We renamed the band The Dolls. It fit. There was nothing ironic about it anymore. Our schedule intensified. Tours,